I would say the threat to multilateralism. Multilateralism is the guarantee for our global security and protection, and we have to protect this at all costs. I know that the world out there is looking to see how multilateralism is benefiting the people on the ground. How is it ending conflicts or preventing conflicts? How it is delivering on development? But I also believe that we have an important responsibility, and as Secretary General I would work on this, is to communicate to our populations about the importance of the United Nations and multilateralism. The generation of World War II is not with us anymore, and history has a way of repeating itself if we don't learn from it and if we don't communicate about this. But I think communicating the work of the UN is better when it's also underpinned by action, and action to make changes on the ground, to see development on the ground. And that is what I would do as Secretary General, communicating why the UN exists, why multilateralism is important, but also what actions are being taken by the United Nations to address the global challenges we face today.
The same question to you, Mr. Sall.
Merci beaucoup. Si nous voulons représenter dignement les peuples et répondre à la promesse de la Charte, nous devons revenir aux fondamentaux de l'organisation, la paix, la sécurité, le développement, les droits humains. Agir efficacement sur ces leviers permet de donner une réponse appropriée à la jeunesse du monde. Je rappelle aujourd'hui, on a près de 4 milliards de jeunes pour lesquels il faut trouver une éducation, une formation, un emploi. Il faut surtout défendre les femmes dans leurs droits, les jeunes filles, dans leur éducation et dans leur statut. Donc, travailler de concert avec l'ensemble des États membres autour de ces priorités doit permettre, à l'issue des prochaines 5 années, de voir que l'ONU est revenue au centre du jeu mondial dans le cadre d'un multilatéralisme rénové au service de l'ensemble des États membres.
Mr. Grossi.
A grave threat is that the current fragmentation we have been talking about, and upon which I think we all coincide, puts us in a point beyond convergence, beyond believing that in spite of all these differences, there are still common denominators. That generation 80 years ago had differences, but it understood that to avoid the scourge and the misery that had affected them twice in one generation, they had to do something different. We are in a difficult position now, and it is not impossible that we will reach the point that cancelling out each other will be the rule. And for that, there is still one UN. Let's not forget that.
Ms. Grynspan.
I think that the main challenge for we the people is the belief that might is right, is the weakening of international law and humanitarian law, is the erosion of the belief what founded this organization, that was the great powers thought that they needed restraint. That's why they built an international organization, an organization where they will exert restraint, not only power. And we need to bring back that idea to the UN. We need to bring back that idea to the great powers and for the coalitions for multilateralism. A multilateralism coalition, the most stable coalition in the small and medium-sized countries, because we need the law, we need the framework, we need the charter, and we need to bring back to it, to the main initial idea, all the other powers also to be able to stabilize the capacity of the UN to be able to bring peace, development, and human rights.
Madam Bachelet.
Well, I think that there are many threats, because it's different the threat that can have a country today in the Gulf, that families and young people in Africa where they have no jobs, or where there are extremist groups that are trying to recruit them. But I believe that the kind of challenges that the world is facing today are global challenges. So nobody's going to solve them themselves. So when there is polarization, fragmentation, intends to weaken the international community, that is really a problem. So that's why, as all of them, as I already said, we need a strong multilateralism. We need a UN that's agile, efficient, effective, transparent, accountable, and that takes in seriously all the different challenges that young people have, that women have, because peace is essential, but there will be no peace and security if there's no development. There will be no peace and security if there's no human rights. We need to work strongly on all of them to be able that people feel that this UN is really responding to what they need.
The greatest threat facing the world's people, to you, Maria Fernanda Espinosa.
Well, allow me to start with a quote. Elie Wiesel, a Nobel Peace Prize, said that the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And I am afraid of that, of indifference, especially understanding that nearly half of humanity is under 30 today. And yet the institutions that are shaping their future and their present are still designed, led, and governed by previous generations. And we see that innovators, leading companies, but also the majority of combatants, including non-armed state groups, gangs, are filled with young people that do not see a future. So my other keyword would be trust. We need to regain trust in international law, in the UN Charter, in the role of the UN, in the importance of cooperation and collective action. And for that, I think that as Secretary Generals, potential, all of us, and hopefully me, our responsibility is to make the UN relevant